Odara says, I was telling my friends that the ruling class has given up any pretense in the past. They would have not been this obvious with the retaliation. I think this is a sign of desperation. Magic says that he knew he was ruffling feathers. I'm sorry, I don't have more bits today, but I'll do better later. No, please, come on. I'm really thankful for your contributions. Um, yeah, so um, I guess, Odara, you make an interesting point. There are things happening, and maybe this is a good segue into what I wanted to talk about today. Um, the level of overt shamelessness with which some of these moves, some of these authoritarian moves are being, um, you know, deployed is concerning. Like I don't think I've seen this level of openly fascist way of ruling, way of being hegemonic before in the history of the United States, and that's saying something because like this is a country that has invaded so many other countries in the past like 100 years. Um, so um, so Magic says on Colbert, I noticed that not many late shows are talking about Palestine, only the Daily Show. Only the Daily Show sometimes, right? Especially Mondays with what's his name, Jon Stewart, right? And yeah, so let me put it this way. Just last week, as you know, the entire Commission of Inquiry for Palestine quit. This is highly unusual. Usually, commissions of inquiry don't all quit at the same time. To my knowledge, it's never happened. And there's speculation that this happened because um, fear of sanctions, because Francesco Albanese was sanctioned a couple of weeks before that, um, initially just by the State Department, meaning that her visa was canceled. Now, however, she's been sanctioned by the with financial consequences. So U.S. persons are legally obligated to not conduct business with her. And so when you think about this, so I have so for, you probably know Juliet McIntyre. Juliet McIntyre is this Australian scholar that works a lot in uh, you know ICJ procedure law. So she's been great on the whole Israel-Palestine thing. But before that, she was very much involved in the Ukraine-Russia case. And because of her writings on this, Russia sanctioned her. And it was like, yeah, it was messed up that Russia sanctioned her, but her life moved on. Like, yeah, she can't go to Russia. And if she had a bank account in Russia, it would be, seized. But she doesn't, right? The thing is, when the US has sanctioned Francesco Albanese, and then before that also sanctioned Karim Khan at the ICC and four judges at the ICC, um, that means that US persons are not allowed to trade with with these individuals, with Francesco Albanese, with Karim Khan, and with the four judges at the ICC. Think of what that means in terms of like US persons. Who's a US person? Visa, MasterCard, they're US persons. So that means that you cannot apply for a debit card. You cannot have a debit card because these US persons need to like not do business with you or be sanctioned by the US. A bank accounts. Banks all over the world use the SWIFT system. The SWIFT system is based in the US. So your bank accounts are seized and your money frozen. Like it really becomes like you are a pariah in the world. It's ridiculous just how much this can affect your life. Like, as far as I remember, Francesca Albanese I think she's a fellow at Georgetown, if I remember correctly. Her base is at Georgetown. That's done. She cannot be employed by Georgetown. She cannot, live in the United States anymore. So this is a massive power that has usually been reserved for people who are off the grid because they are members of some, I don't know, armed group opposing the United States. So no one has ever thought of this too much. But now this amazing, incredibly powerful power is being deployed against scholars, UN experts, judges, prosecutors. Like the real question, the question Can the rule of law survive this? Can the international rule of law survive a attack by a hegemonic power that can take your visa away, freeze your bank accounts, like make Booking.com not sell you um, a hotel room? Can the rule of law survive when a state is this powerful? It can ruin your life to this degree. It's not like Russia sanctioning you, like nothing happens, you just move on with your life. You put it on your profile on Twitter, like haha, sanctioned by Russia. No, your much of your financial life is over. It's really scary when you think about it, right? So it becomes a legitimate question. Can the international legal system survive this? And for the longest time, this was unthinkable. This was something that, the people involved, like in governing the United States, would never do this. It would never work. But then, of course, Trump has no limits, and so he does. And so you have these like ecosystem of people who hate the UN because the UN like uh, doesn't let Israel off the hook, that are salivating, running campaigns, trying to convince Trump to sanction people. It's really scary when you think about it. It's really problematic from the perspective of the rule of law. Is it possible for the global South to say we actually want to support Palestine? If then that means that the United States will slap you a 50% tariff because you support Palestine as a state. Like if this is the way we want to deploy sovereignty, if this is how it's going to work from now on, then I guess the question is, what's the point of international law? If you can destroy economies, you can destroy people to this degree, right? So Odara says everything they have tried before to quiet the pro-Palestine movement hasn't worked, so they are escalating more and more to shut this down. Well, I mean, you have also what's happening in this country, in the UK. Recently, a group called Palestine, is it Action for Palestine? Palestine Action? I don't remember exactly the name. I think it's Action for Palestine. Um, was prescribed, meaning that it is on the same level as Hamas and on the same level as ISIS. Palestine Action, thank you, Iconoclast. So they are now prescribed. They are as if they were ISIS or they were Hamas, and you cannot display support for them, which is already pretty bad because I mean, when the proscription offense was regulated in the Terrorism Act in the UK, essentially the government promised that it wouldn't use these awesome, scary powers in the prosecution of domestic demonstrations and domestic groups. Um, it's this weird thing where like we have this set of rules that are only reserved for people that are outside of the country, right? They're only outside of the country that where it matters. You can be shot by a drone as a U.S. citizen in Yemen, but not in the United States. It's a very weird concept, but it is a concept that is like we have these laws that are like basically we know that they don't respect human rights, and then we say, but don't worry, we will only apply them to people in Yemen, to people in Pakistan, to people in Afghanistan. We won't apply it to real people, quote unquote, back home, right? And now the government simply is. It's saying we're going to prescribe Palestine action and expressing support or even leading to support from any kind of negligence, like being negligent and generating support for Palestine action, um, is now a criminal offense. So I'm obliged, like as of like due diligence here, to tell you nothing that I am saying should be interpreted as support for Palestine action because otherwise it would be an offense, right? So that is uh, displaying a level of repression that is quite intense, right? To the point where Kent police is now saying in Kent is an area like southeast of London, the police in Kent are saying that waving a Palestinian flag can be interpreted as expressing support for Palestine action. And so they are arresting people for just expressing support for Palestine, which is like scary. It's a level of intensity in policing speech um, that is quite concerning to me from a freedom of speech perspective. It's laws. It's it's laws that are really um, not very democratic in nature, that normally people don't care about because they only apply to people in, the Middle East. So who cares, right? In Spanish, we have an expression, los derechos humanos son para humanos derechos. So human rights are for righteous people. And so it doesn't, if you're not a righteous person, then I don't care about your human rights. And it's a terrible, terrible way of looking at things because like it means that you enable the state to determine who is worthy of rights, and then eventually that'll catch up with you, and you'll become the person who's like doesn't have any rights. So it's a terrible way of looking at human rights, but it's the way that these things have worked. We have these like really expansive, really anti-democratic terrorism legislations um, that are now out of control, right? And now they're being applied in the homeland, right? Colonial boomerang style, and it's very dangerous. And again, like I need to like out of legal due diligence as a lawyer, I need to say, please understand, nothing that I am saying should be understood as support for any prescribed organization. That's the level to which I need to be careful about this, just by discussing prescription in the UK. It's kind of crazy, particularly when like there's so much talk from the right wing saying like, oh, there's no freedom of speech in the UK. Um, I mean, it's ironic that it's the right wing complaining about this when the proscribed group is Palestine Action. It's really crazy. It's really concerning, right? So when I see the when I see the ICC being sanctioned, when I see Francesco Albanese being sanctioned by the US, when I see four judges of the ICC being sanctioned, when I see three members of the Commission of Inquiry in Palestine quitting at the same time, out of fear of being sanctioned, presumably out of fears of being sanctioned, when I see these reports that the ICC prosecutor was like allegedly threatened by an Israeli lawyer who denies everything, but like the report is that he threatened him not to pursue any more arrest warrants for the Palestine case in the ICC, um, when you tie all that up, it starts to look, and you add up, the prescription of Palestine action, um, it starts to look um, like things have gotten out of control in terms of like how speech is being policed, how accountability mechanisms are being boycotted, and sometimes even purposefully like, seeking their destruction. Um, and I get to think like, why? What is the reason? What is the reason that this is happening? Why is it that there's this huge crisis, this crackdown on all of these actors that are seeking either, um, I actually can't, I don't think I can legally say this. Like, I don't think I can discuss what these groups are actually saying, like wanting to achieve. Um, you see the kinds of things that we need to like be careful about. Because if I discuss the objectives of the group, then it might lead some of you to like express support for them, and so I need to be careful about that. Because I need to be very careful that none of you express support for that group. So yeah, yeah, better not talk about it, right? Um, so let me rephrase. Um, it is it's a crazy situation that we're in right now. Um, so wait, Rosova says, yeah, this is starting to resemble USSR levels of censorship. I mean, I lived in Peru most of my life. When I was little, between 1985 when I was born and 2000, Peru was ruled by a like pretty ruthless guy, authoritarian president Alberto Fujimori, who basically bought off all the press. And if you criticized the government, there was a relatively big chance that your family might get a visit from some guy, like I'm still here style, and you would need to flee the country, or you might get like killed or tortured or intimidated. And then there was also the Shining Path and the MRTA, which were groups that, yeah, if you expressed any kind of like opposition to their cause and you were big enough in politics, they would kidnap you or even assassinate you. And so while I was growing up, yeah, there were a lot of pretty intense restrictions to freedom of speech. But I was in 2000, I was 14. Right? So I didn't really need to worry about my freedom of expression being limited here, or here, no, in Peru, right? I didn't need to worry about my freedom of expression being limited in this way because I was a kid, and I mean, kids are not really that worried about these things. So by the time I grew up and I turned 18 and like started getting more involved in politics and studying and like getting more involved in things, that was like 2002, 2003. I started college. Um, I never really had to worry about what I was saying publicly. I've written a book that many conservatives in Peru hate, like despise, because they believe that that makes me a terrorism apologist. Um, so many politicians in Peru consider me a terrorist. So many people in Peru hate my guts because I wrote that book saying that Peru had fought an armed conflict against the Shining Path, and that made me a terrorism supporter for some reason. We can talk about that some other day. But the point is, I wrote a book that was incredibly uncomfortable to some very powerful people. I never had to worry about restrictions to my freedom of speech. Peru has some problems with defamation laws, like people with money weaponize defamation to silence people, to silence reporters. That does happen. But me, at least me as an individual, I never had to worry that if I wrote a book about something, or if I made a point about a specific political argument, the government, not some rando with money that would sue me, the government would come after me and put me in jail. I never had to worry about that. Even when I was researching, I was researching the Shiny Path, like which is like the number one enemy of Peru. Like a group that I personally despise, right? But I was researching it and I was saying things that the people in power were not liking about it. They didn't like that I said that it was an armed conflict. Um, I never felt like I was at risk of like violating any kind of law, even when I was researching terrorism stuff or terrorism related stuff. Now I'm in the UK and we're having these conversations. I'm thinking like, yeah, I need to be careful how I explain this. Like I'm not even like here advocating for anything. I'm simply literally explaining what happened, right? Explaining what was done to this group and what that means. And I'm having to think, well, I need to be careful how I phrase it because I don't want to violate the law. Just by explaining it, which is a very weird, very weird thing for me to experience because like I moved to the global north, presumably this like super free part of the world, and this is what I'm confronted with. It's a surreal experience to me, where I feel like I definitely freedom of expression was much less restricted in Peru than it is in the United Kingdom, at least as of the time when I was 18 onwards. I never had to worry about the government persecuting me for my uh, speech. Again, not even for my advocacy, for like literally just trying to explain what happened, right? So yeah, it's scary. Um, so Bernhard says apparently holding up any sign with the words Palestine and action is forbidden. Pretty much, yeah. Pretty much. Um, Guadara says most Americans are either drowning on debt or glued to the phones entertaining their misery away. They feel they are too overloaded with their lives to care for others. There's just a lot of racism and bigotry. Um, so Birdie too says it's a sign of desperation. All the mainstream politicians and the media try to justify their crimes, and all polls show people don't believe them. They completely lost the public discourse. And yeah, and so this is a good segue here, Birdie too. Thanks for saying that, because like that's what I um where I wanted to take this conversation in the hour we have. Because why is it that it's getting this intense? Why is it that the United States is sanctioning the ICC and like the UK is banning new groups and like why is it? And I feel it's because so I have a strong belief that ideas are only persecuted when they have power. So um, when I was growing up, the LGBT movement essentially meant a battle for gay rights, and trans people sort of like were included in the group LGBT, but they were not a visible segment of the struggle. They were basically there out of solidarity, so that gays and lesbians could carry them with them, in out of a sense of solidarity. But the struggles, the debates were about gay marriage. They were not about trans rights. They were not about trans people in bathrooms. Um, why? Because the idea of gay marriage had a lot of power behind it. People could see the trends. People could see where things were leading, like that gay marriage was going to be legalized. And people made arguments like this is going to be the end of the world because God is going to get angry at us because we're going to legislate gay marriage. And like it's funny to think of that. Like it's fun. It's funny to think about like what things looked like in terms of like LGBT rights in the early 2000s, like 2001, 2002, considering that there were people that were saying if today happened, if things looked like they look today, then it would be the end of the world and God would come down from the skies and kill us all. And it's like, God didn't. Can I go back in time 25 years and tell this crazy person that like it'll be fine? The world will not end if you regulate gay marriage? But again, like the reason why this debate was so centered along gay rights was because the risk was that people would be okay with gay marriage, with gay rights, with people, with two men holding hands in the streets. That was dangerous because it had power, because people would accept that that should be legalized, that that should follow the natural process. But no one was really outraged or worried about trans people in bathrooms. That didn't really have power. That idea didn't really have power. That was like the T in LGBT was sort of like included there out of solidarity, not because it was part of the discussion. So that idea had no power, therefore no one worried about it. There were no hardline anti-gay activists that were discussing who can use a bathroom and who cannot, whether trans athletes can compete in like gendered sports. Like this wasn't the thing because the idea didn't have enough power. Now that the gay rights battle, at least in the West, has mostly been won, it is now that the next move, let's say, is to move into trans rights, and that's why now we have like the J.K. Rowlings of the world, because I mean the idea now has power. Now it is a true possibility to say, oh, this is ridiculous. Transphobia is discriminatory. Let's stop it with the transphobia. Now the idea has power, so now there's a lot of pushback against it, right? I feel it's the same thing with Palestine. I feel the reason why there's so much that is happening, that is so repressive, that is so out of this world, sanctioning the ICC prosecutor to the level where he cannot even have a Visa card or a MasterCard or a bank account in the UK, is a sign that the idea of Palestinian rights is starting to get power. Like the writing is in the wall. Eventually, like this guy, this really annoying guy on Twitter shared, like I forgot, Elliot Malin, forgot I forgot who he was, but Elliot Malin shared this like poll about how he shared it as a good thing, saying, "Oh, people side with Israel over Hamas," which is such a weird way of putting a poll like this. Like, do you side more with Hamas or with Israel? Is very one-sided. But even with this one-sided question, where you supposedly have a quote unquote democracy and an armed group that targets civilians, and you ask who do you side with, 40% of 18 to 24 said Hamas, which is crazy, right? Hamas, again, a proscribed organization, right, in the United Kingdom, which again, I need to say, like, do not interpret anything I'm saying here as support for a proscribed organization, right? Um, but it's crazy how like it's um, 40% of 18 to 24s in the US sided with Hamas over Israel. I find that incredible, like unthinkable just a decade ago, right? And so I feel like part of the issue here is that now change Hamas and put Palestine. Do you side more with Palestine or do you side more with Israel? I think the overwhelming majority of young people, if not like, I guess under 40, would say Palestine at this point, and that's not normal. Normally, people would have said Israel. So I've talked about this in my interviews with Owen Jones often. Like I've joked about this before. Every now and then he invites me and says like, "Okay, can you explain how this is still strategically a defeat for Israel? Because tactically it looks like a lot of wins, in the regional level." Um, And I think that's the thing. The idea of Palestinian rights, the idea of a one-state solution, the idea of equal rights for all, the idea that Zionism is a settler colonial ideology that, is almost eliminationist by design, is gaining traction at a very rapid pace. Um, and so it is because that idea has power that now there are people who are responding with like overwhelming, disproportionate, almost like surreal responses. They're saying, okay, you won't be able to have a credit card, Francesca Albanese. Um, or I will send the Mossad on you, ICC prosecutor, because the idea is starting to garner power. Um, and that's what I wanted to discuss because like I don't know if you saw, you probably saw, but there was this article in the New York Times by Omer Bartov. It really looks like a before and after, but it isn't. Okay, like Omer Bartov is just like publishing this article at the cusp of a big wave of academic um, argumentation and academic consensus and discourse that is leading in the way of saying uh, what's happening in Gaza is definitely 100% a genocide, right? So he's just riding the top of the wave of this. I'm actually one of the videos I'm working on for YouTube. One of the upcoming videos that I have, one of the longer video essays, is on this. Is trying to map this do like a literature review of the academic discourse on why this is a genocide. So you get Omer Bartov, a very well-respected professor of genocide and Holocaust studies, saying it is a Holocaust. It is a genocide, um, and instead of like ignoring him, like people have ignored Jessica White, like people have ignored Nimr Sultani, like people have ignored Ralph Wild, like people have ignored I don't know who else has said this, Omer Magdoum, like people have ignored William Shabas, like people have ignored Dirk Moses. So many academics that have said this before Omer Bartov, Amos Goldberg, Ras Siegel, so many academics that have said this is a genocide, and people were able to ignore him. But Omer Bartov just published this article at the right time in the Overton window, um, and it was impossible to ignore to the point where the New York Times, not exactly your pro-Palestine outlet, felt compelled to publish it. Right? This is not normal for the New York Times. Right, so the Overton window has opened for the discussion of genocide to that point where a lot of academics said before this is a genocide, um, and all of a sudden this article, and like Bernard was saying, Bartov has been saying that this is a genocide for a long time now. I think the first time he published an article, he said that it was most likely a genocide. Now he's saying it is a genocide, right? So there's a slight difference there. But he's been saying this for a while. The fact that this article became relevant, that this article did anything at all, um, is a sign that the idea of Palestinian rights is gaining power. You cannot simply just ignore this anymore, the way that we've ignored so many other scholars that are saying this, right? So it is interesting. Just the fact that this article became relevant is interesting, right? So I wanted to talk about this and how the Overton window is expanding, is opening to allow for contrary discourse on on the discussion on whether um, Gaza is a genocide or not. And so, just really quickly, wanted to go through a couple of key moments that I think are opening this window, this Overton window. So the first one would be this article, right? It says like a month after the Hamas attacks on Israel on October 7th, I believe there was evidence that the Israeli military had committed war crimes and potentially crimes against humanity in its counterattack on Gaza. But contrary to the cries of Israel's fiercest critics, the evidence did not seem to me to rise to the crime of genocide, right? So bear that in mind. This is someone who was convinced that this became a genocide. So by May 2024, the Israeli Defense Forces ordered about 1 million Palestinians sheltering in Rafah, the southernmost and last remaining relatively undamaged city in the Gaza Strip, to move to the beach area of the Mawasi, where there was little to no shelter. The army then proceeded to destroy much of Rafah, a feat mostly accomplished by August. At that point, it appeared no longer possible to deny that the pattern of the IDF operations was consistent with the statements denoting genocidal intent made by the Israeli leaders in the days after the Hamas attack. Prime Minister Netanyahu had promised that the enemy would pay a huge price for the attack and that the IDF would turn parts of Gaza where Hamas was operating into rubble. And he called on the residents of Gaza to leave now because we will operate forcefully everywhere. Netanyahu had urged his citizens to remember what Amalek did to you, a quote many interpreted as a reference to the demand in a biblical passage calling for the Israelites to kill alike men and women, infants and sucklings, of their ancient enemy. Governments and military officials said they were fighting human animals and later called for total annihilation. Nissim Vaturi, the deputy speaker of parliament, said on X that Israel's task must be, quote, erasing the Gaza Strip from the face of the earth. Israel's actions could be understood only as the implementation of the express intent to make the Gaza Strip uninhabitable for its Palestinian population. I believe the goal, and remains today, was and remains today, to force the population to leave the Strip altogether, or considering that it has nowhere to go, to debilitate the enclave enough through bombings and severe deprivation of food, clean water, sanitation, and medical aid to such an extent that it is impossible for Palestinians in Gaza to maintain or reconstitute their existence as a group. My inescapable conclusion has become that Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinian people. So this is interesting, because like I feel like um, I feel like the risk of genocide was always there in that the statements by these politicians were always there. Like they were not new, as part of himself describes. So honestly, I don't really understand this. Oh, it was only by August that I made up my mind, um, because nothing really changed on the ground. Like it's not like this was something. It's not like Israel's conduct in the beginning was fundamentally different from what they did in Rafah. The only difference with what they did in Rafah was that the ICJ told them not to, right? But the kind of military tactics that they use have remained consistent. So I don't really understand this. Like, oh, there was a point in time where I convinced myself. I think that you might even say, okay, it took me until August to conclude that everything was a genocide, that they were really, that when Netanyahu said Amalek, he really did mean Amalek. It took me time to be convinced of that. But if that's the case, then it's not that there's a genocide as of August. It's that there was always a genocide. And I think that's important to like to push to push back here. Right? He says, having grown up in a Zionist home, lived the first half of my life in Israel, served in the IDF as a soldier and officer, and spent most of my career researching and writing on war crimes and the Holocaust. This was a painful conclusion to reach and one that I resisted as long as I could. Why though? Why? So if you're approaching this from the perspective of I need to resist this, then you're not being really objective. There's a reason why the earliest people that were saying this is genocide were Palestinians, because of course they weren't trying to resist it. People know when they're being genocided, right? So the idea that you're resisting it is problematic to me. Like why were you resisting it? Because you're Israeli? Like I don't know. Like it doesn't feel like that's the standard. The standard doesn't say, oh, you need intent to destroy in a specific genocidal act, and you need to like not be able to tolerate it anymore. That's not how it works. Like it feels like you're late already, right? But I have been teaching classes on genocide for a quarter of a century. I can recognize one when I see one. Well, eventually, right? This is not just my conclusion. A growing number of experts in genocide studies and international law have concluded that Israel's actions in Gaza can now be defined as genocide. So has Francesco Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur for the West Bank and Gaza, and Amnesty International. South Africa has brought a genocide case against Israel at the International Court of Justice. The continued denial of this designation by states, international organizations, and legal and scholarly experts will cause unmitigated damage not just to the people of Gaza and Israel, but also to the system of international law established in the wake of the horrors of the Holocaust, designed to prevent such atrocities from happening ever again. It is a threat to the very foundations of the moral order on which we all depend. So then he explains the crime of genocide and Israel's defense. He says, Israel has denied all allegations of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. The IDF says that it investigates reports of crimes, although it has rarely made its findings public, and when breaches of disciplines or protocol are acknowledged, it has generally meted light reprimands to its personnel. In fact, the systematic destruction of Gaza, not only of housing, but also other infrastructure, government buildings, hospitals, universities, schools, mosques, cultural heritage sites, water treatment plants, agricultural areas, and parks, reflects a policy aimed at making the revival of Palestinian life in the territory highly unlikely. Satsikil Sid says, seems like he had the same realization as Shael. Uh, I, um, I don't really understand Shael. Like, I had discussions with him before his conversion. He was pretty into it. So I don't know if he's overcompensating or what. I don't really understand how someone can go from 0 to 180 in like a matter of months. I'm, I guess I'm glad that he is no longer supporting genocide. Uh, but like, I guess this is one thing where I would push back on like the kind of things that Hassan Piker says. Like Hassan Piker says, like if someone changes their mind, welcome them to the group because we need the numbers. Like, sure, we need the numbers, but I don't need to welcome them. Like, um, I do feel there's an element of this that means that requires you to sort of like feel bad uh, and pay a price for having supported this in the past. And I mean, I guess he understands that now because when he went on with to talk to Owen Jones, his interview with Owen Jones was very um, there were things there. There were things that like were problematic, I believe. So I don't really understand where he is right now. It's a weird, it's a very quick conversion. I don't know. Like to a degree, I feel like I don't want to talk about him specifically. I don't know him. I don't know his motives or his motivations, but I do feel like there is a lot of people that, and again, I'm not talking about him specifically. There's a lot of people that are seeing that the ship is sinking, and they're trying to flee the sinking ship. Iconoclast says Shael is completely turning anti-Zionist. He said that because he supported it for so long. He feels he needs to indeed compensate. Is he though? I don't know. I mean, I'll wait and see. I don't know. Anyway, um, Satsiegels, it says he had an interview with the Bad Hasbara guys, like with Daniel Mate privately. I don't know this guy. No. Again, look, I don't know what his motivations are. I just don't think someone can make that steep a turn that quickly, that easily. So I'll wait and see where he lands and what are his positions, I guess, because like his interview with Owen Jones was not very reassuring to me. Uh, so I do think that there's a lot of again, not speaking of him specifically, but there's a lot of people that, and we'll talk about this in a second, that have realized that they probably messed up by defending this. Um, so yeah, so we have this article here. I want to get to some might describe this campaign as ethnic cleansing, not genocide, but there is a link between the crimes. When an ethnic group has nowhere to go and is constantly displaced from one so-called safe zone to another, relentlessly bombed and starved, ethnic cleansing can morph into genocide. This was the case in several well-known genocides of the 20th century, such as that of the Herero and Nama in German Southwest Africa, now Namibia, that began in 1904, the Armenians in World War One, and indeed even in the Holocaust, which began with the German attempt to expel the Jews and ended up with their murder. To this day, only a few scholars of the Holocaust and no institution dedicated to researching and commemorating it has issued a warning that Israel could be accused of carrying out war crimes, crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing, or genocide. This silence has made a mockery of the slogan "Never Again," transforming its meaning from an assertion of resistance to inhumanity wherever it is perpetrated to an excuse, an apology, indeed even a carte blanche for destroying others by invoking one's own past victimhood. Um, This is another of the many incalculable costs of the current catastrophe, as Israel is literally trying to wipe out Palestinian existence in Gaza and is exercising increased violence against Palestinians in the West Bank. The moral and historical credit which the Jewish state has drawn until now is running out. See, I don't particularly understand this, like the historical credit. Is there? Is there really? Again, when people say history did not start on October 7th, and I know Omer Bartov knows this. Like I know who I'm reading, right? But the wording here is weird. What is the moral and historical credit which the Jewish state has drawn until now? Um, I don't know if it's moral and historical credit. I think it's more like people were willing to accept more of the law and operations because of racialization and because they don't consider Palestinians human. I don't think it's because Israel is a particularly moral and moral state. Um, so Birdie2 says, I read the article from Barber from a year ago where he said that the idea of soldiers he spoke to were as indoctrinated as the Wehrmacht soldiers who committed the Holocaust. He didn't change his mind overnight or ever said that there were no crimes. Uh, yeah, no, that is true. That is true. I mentioned that he had this previous article as well. So he even says that it was a longer process, and it took him until August 2024 to realize that yeah, this is genocide. He never said that there were no war crimes. I just don't understand this idea of like, oh, now I can say that it is a genocide. I would expect this to be more like I have come to terms with the fact that it was always a genocide, not so much that as of August 2024 now I can say it's a genocide. Um, Rosova says, I think this paragraph needs to be read with a Western lens. Yeah, but that is kind of the problem, right? Because like again, this article is making the rounds, but this article is written by an Israeli historian. I'm sure he would understand the critique as a well-meaning one, but like it is, it goes to the original point by Edward Said saying that Palestinians are not allowed to narrate their own oppression. Right? It needs to come from an Israeli for it to be legitimate. When like Nimer Sultani was writing an article about this, the exact same thing, in a peer-reviewed leading journal of genocide in like I think it was like April 2024. Right. So why do we need to wait until this article so that it makes the rounds? Right. And I know why. It's because the ideas of like Palestinian rights have only gotten power now as opposed to like in the past. In the past months, when Nimer Sultani was writing this, you couldn't really even say genocide without fearing for your job, right? Um, but so I guess timing is a factor here. But it is interesting how this Western lens is necessary for understanding this article, right? Um, so let's see. See, how will Israel's future be affected by the inevitable demolition of its incontestable morality? Okay, what incontestable morality? Right? This again, this sentence only makes sense if you accept mowing the lawn and the annexation of East Jerusalem and the collaboration with the settler program and the checkpoints and all of the apartheid as and not so bad. I feel like it's really weird because like again I know who I'm reading. It's just weird phrasing, even like because I feel like he should know not to write this, you know. Um, so it's incontestable morality derived from its birth in the ashes of the Holocaust. Like again, this ignores the Nakba. Israel's political leadership and its citizenry will have to decide. There seems to be little domestic pressure for the urgently needed change of paradigm. The recognition that there is no solution to this conflict other than an Israeli-Palestinian agreement to share the land under whatever parameters the two sides agree on, be it on two states or one state or a confederation. Robust external pressure from the country's allies also appears unlikely. I am deeply worried that Israel will persist on its disastrous course, remaking itself, perhaps irreversibly, into a full-blown authoritarian apartheid state. Again, like, what do you mean um, like remaking itself into an authoritarian apartheid state? What do you mean irreversible? It already is an authoritarian apartheid state. These sentences only make sense if if so much of the authoritarian apartheid nature of Israel is ignored. Um, so Birdie2 says, yes, maybe it is written for New York Times readers, journalists. Yeah, but he should know better, though, right? It's like I, I I was surprised to read this article in this way, to find these sentences in this article. Another question arises: what consequences will Israel's moral reversal have for the culture of Holocaust commemoration and the politics of memory, education, and scholarship when so many of its intellectual and administrative leaders have up to now refused to face up to the responsibility to denounce inhumanity and genocide wherever they occur? Look, I sincerely, I do believe that the memorialization of the Holocaust should not be overshadowed um, by the Zionism of a lot of the people who are Holocaust scholars who are in charge of Holocaust centers or Holocaust remembrance. I understand where he's going with this. I agree with this, but are we really asking the question, what will happen to the genocide of Jewish people as a consequence of the Jewish state genociding Palestinians? Like, is this the place to have this question posed? Like, okay, I am concluding that we are genociding, like we Israelis are genociding Palestinians. What will happen to the Holocaust, though? Like, I don't see the connection, particularly because like Israel and Jewish people should not be conflated, right? We understand that. So it's that this is the article that has sort of like exploded everywhere and has become the nail in the coffin for the opening of the Overton window and allowing us to discuss, um, you know, this as a genocide is weird because this is a very weirdly phrased article. Like, I don't see this as uh, a good sentence. Like, really, you are wondering what will happen to the commemoration of the genocide of Jewish people in the article where you're telling me that Israel is committing its own genocide against Palestinians. Why? Like, why are we doing that? Um, like, are we not taking the focus away from the genocide that you are describing to talk about something else? Why is that here? I don't get it. And again, this is the article that has turned around the way people think. It's really weird to me. So those engaged in the worldwide culture of commemoration and remembrance built around the Holocaust will have to confront a moral reckoning. Again, why are we talking about this? The wider community of genocide scholars, those engaged in the study of comparative genocide, or of any one of the many other genocides that have marked human history, is now edging ever closer towards a consensus over describing events in Gaza as a genocide. This is true. In November, a little more than a year into the war, the Israeli genocide scholar Shmuel Litterman joined a growing chorus of opinion that Israel was engaging in genocidal actions. The Canadian international lawyer William Shabas came to the same conclusion last year and has recently described Israel's military campaign in Gaza as absolutely a genocide. Other genocide experts, such as Melanie O'Brien, president of the International Association of Genocide Scholars, and the British specialist Martin Shaw, who has also said that the Hamas attack was genocidal, have reached the same conclusion, while the Australian scholar Dirk Moses of the University of New York described these events in the Dutch publication NRC as a mix of genocidal and military logic. In the same article, Ugur Umut Ungur, a professor at the Amsterdam-based NIOD Institute for War, Holocaust, and Genocide Studies, said there are probably scholars who still do not think it's genocide, but I don't know them. Most Holocaust scholars I know don't hold or at least publicly express this view, with few notable exceptions such as the Israeli Ras Siegel, the program director of the Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Stockton University in New Jersey, and the Hebrew University of Jerusalem historians Amos Goldberg and Daniel Blattman. The majority of academics engaged with the history of the Nazi genocide of Jews have stayed remarkably silent, while some have openly denied Israel's crimes in Gaza or accused their more critical colleagues of incendiary speech, wild exaggeration, and well-poisoning and anti-Semitism. In December, the Holocaust scholar Norman J.W. Coda opined that genocide charges like this have long been used as a fig leaf for broader challenges of Israel's legitimacy, expressing his worry that they have cheapened the gravity of the word genocide itself. Sorry. This genocide libel, as Dr. Goda referred to in an essay, deploys a range of anti-Semitic tropes, including the coupling of the genocide charge with the deliberate killing of children, images of whom are ubiquitous on NGO, social media, and other platforms that charge Israel with genocide. Like I guess this can be an interesting conversation to have in this article, but again, I feel like it is shifting the attention away from the people that are being genocided. Um, so I don't really, I don't really think you can write an article about the crisis in genocide studies. That's normal. Like, that's okay. But if you're writing an article called This is a Genocide, and then you're ending up with worrying more about the legitimacy of Holocaust scholars, something's wrong. Iconoclast says, do you believe that people have been persuaded after reading this article? He's not saying anything he wasn't said by those who called genocide long ago. I think people are discussing this article in very different ways as they discuss his first article. His first article was, oh, this is premature. This article has become a little bit more mainstreamed. But as I read it, I can't help to think like this is a bit of a problematic article as well. Yeah. So to conclude, he says, perhaps the only light at the end of this very dark tunnel is the possibility that a new generation of Israelis will face their future without sheltering in the shadow of the Holocaust, even as they will have to bear the stain of genocide in Gaza perpetrated in their name. I don't believe this is going to happen. Not yet, at least. I don't think this is going to happen. But yeah, so I, I do believe that this article has marked a before and after in the way that this topic is being discussed. It is not the only one, though. It is not the only one. So one thing that is um, like one thing that happened that I also think changed like the Overton window. Statistically, it says, why are liberals more offended about seeing the images than the actual content of the images? Yeah, yeah, I get that. Yeah, so another thing that happened that is slowly changing the Overton window, although that has been less mainstreamed. Not a lot of people have written about this. It hasn't garnered the traction that I think it should. Is I don't know if you guys saw this letter here. No, not this letter. Hold on. This letter here. So I think you can read it, right? I think you can read it. That's better. Okay, so it says 16 international law scholars, among them Professor Benvenisti, who was part of the international law defense team in the ICJ, warned that if Israel Katz, who's the Minister of Foreign Relations of Israel, if his plan for the concentration of population in the southern Gaza materializes, it might be a conduct which falls under the prohibition of genocide. And so they write this letter about how this would be genocidal. It's a very interesting letter because, including in the signatories, you can see here, I don't know if you can see here, it says Eyal Benvenisti, um, it says uh, Yuval Shani. Yuval Shani and Eyal Benvenisti were originally, like, Benvenisti was, as the tweet says, in the Israel defense team at The Hague. And Yuval Shani wrote a very early on article on why South Africa's arguments and why Amnesty's report were wrong and how it really wasn't a genocide. So there's a bit of a 180 here in this letter by people who are very close to the arguments that the Israeli state makes about this genocide. So I feel like this letter should have garnered more attention as a massive U-turn by uh, so people that have either not all of them. There are people that have spoken against this in among those signatures, but either have stayed silent for a very long time, um, or that they actively supported this. And so this is a big 180 because what they're saying is if you do this humanitarian city in Gaza, then that will be genocide. But there's an inherent contradiction here because, of course, these people can't say it was always genocide. I just supported it before. So there needs to be some sort of like turning point. The turning point is like if you do this, then I will say it's genocide. But there's a weird thing. There's an internal contradiction in this letter that is escaping a lot of the commentary that I've seen on it. Is that if Israel is currently planning something that is genocidal, it already has genocidal intent now. So why would that genocidal intent not apply to what it is doing right now? If the end goal is the production of something that these scholars would consider a genocide, 100% a genocide, if the end goal is to get there, then the genocidal intent already exists. And therefore there already is a genocide. You see what I mean? So they're trying to say that no, only as of this ghetto that Israel wants to build, only as of then, it would be a genocide. But if Israel is already planning it, then the intent is proven. So it's a weird letter in that regard. So I wanted to read it a little bit quickly with you so that you can see what it says. So it says here July 10, 2025, to Minister of Defense MK Israel Katz and a bunch of other people. Um, oh, sorry, you guys can't read this. Hold on. Oh, okay, this is really inconvenient. We scholars and lecturers at Israeli law faculty specializing in international law and the laws of armed conflict wish to express our unequivocal professional position and warn against the clear and explicit illegality inherent in the plan to concentrate the population of Gaza in a so-called humanitarian city. It's a ghetto. It's a ghetto. To be established in the ruins of Rafah. This plan was presented by the Minister of Defense Israel Katz in Minister of Defense, sorry, July 7, 2025, and according to reports, is endorsed by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu as part of a broader plan to encourage emigration from Gaza. We emphasize and warn that any order to plan and execute this program would constitute a manifestly illegal order as it calls for a clear and unambiguous breach of the law, a certain and essential illegality evident in the face of the order itself, a clearly criminal nature of the order or the acts it commands, and illegality that is obvious and shocking to the conscience if the eye is not blind and the heart is not indifferent or corrupt. Judgment of the Israeli Military Court of Appeals. Blah 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 blah. If implemented, the plan would constitute a series of war crimes and crimes against humanity, and under certain conditions, it could amount to the crime of genocide. Again, this is people that have been in Israel's legal defense. This is people that have written articles as to why it is not a genocide. So I feel like this should be this should have won the Overton Window more than the Omer Bartov article. um, uh, but again, it's interesting how it's still Israelis, right? We're still talking about how Israelis are opening the Overton window when Palestinians have been saying this has been a genocide for the past like 20 something months. Um, so blah blah blah. So it says, we feel a professional and moral duty to warn against the following fundamental issues. So there's a moral and legal duty to warn about this plan, but not, say, the systematic destruction of every home in Gaza. 70% of homes being destroyed. It's an interesting wording here. Uh, One, forced concentration of the population in southern Gaza is manifestly illegal. Evacuation of a population from a residential area is permissible only for the population's own safety or due to an imperative military necessity in a specific area. The legality of such an evacuation is conditioned, among other things, on ensuring adequate living conditions in the area of relocation and that the evacuation is not used as political pressure or for other illegitimate goals. It must also be temporary, ending immediately once the specific necessity has ceased. So this is interesting because this is something that a lot of pro-Israel people have argued against me. Whenever they said, oh, evacuations are legal under international humanitarian law, this is what belligerents should do. They should evacuate the civilian population. My immediate response is evacuate it where? The difference between a forced displacement and evacuation is that evacuation is evacuated to somewhere. Where when people in northern Israel were evacuated from northern Israel because of the Hezbollah rockets, they were evacuated to hotels in southern Israel. Right? Where are Palestinians being evacuated to? And of course, the answer is nowhere. They're being told to leave their homes and go die in no man's land. Right? It's a death march. It's a forced displacement. So the fact that people that have sat in Israel's defense team are saying this now is feels good. um, so the proposed plan, as it emerges from the Ministry of Defense statement, does not comply with this criteria due to the following. Purpose: the evacuation, as portrayed by the plan, is not from a specific zone of hostilities, but from the entire Gaza Strip to Rafah, and therefore is incompatible with the permitted grounds for such an action, which are the security of the population or an imperative military necessity. No legitimate consideration of protection or military necessity has been presented to justify the evacuation of the entire population. But isn't this what happened in the beginning of the conflict? Isn't this what Israel did when it said to all the citizens of northern Gaza, go, leave northern Gaza within 24 hours or else? Like, why is this different to what happened before is what I'm saying, right? Um, protection and living conditions. The lawfulness of such a plan should be assessed in light of the difficult state of the civilian population in Gaza. The conditions of the infrastructure in South Gaza, and especially in Rafah, is dire, and it is highly doubtful that the region can provide minimum humanitarian or hygiene conditions for 600,000 people, let alone the entire population of Gaza. The higher number of casualties around 8 distribution centers in recent weeks attests to the catastrophic consequences of concentrating large populations in such conditions. If implemented in the light of the prevailing conditions and from the experience of recent events in the area, the minister's plans will likely lead to even worse outcomes. But again, you are even talking about previous outcomes. So again, why now? Why this? Why now? You know, like you are saying that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has achieved similar results, similar inhumane results. So why isn't that genocidal as well? You've talked about how displacement from northern Gaza also produced. I mean, Gaza has been destroyed for a long time now. What about all the other evacuation orders? Why not those? Why only this one? Is what I'm saying. It's a weird thing in this letter. Temporariness. From the statement, it is apparent that the minister not only intends to move the population to a camp in Rafah, but also to bar them from leaving that camp. At the same time, the IDF is systematically destroying residential areas in the civilian and civilian infrastructure across the strip, undermining the possibility of return. But again, this already happened. This already happened when people left northern Gaza to the south. They destroyed homes in northern Gaza so that when they told Palestinians that they could return home, people returned to destroyed homes. And then they displaced them again with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation thing to make them leave. So this is again these displacement orders are not really temporary either. These other displacement orders are not temporary either. They have been there for the past 20-something months. So why now? Right? Proportionality. In light of the above, an evacuation plan such as planned by the minister, even where there would be a legitimate purpose for undertaking it, which we reject, would be clearly disproportionate to the intolerable harm it would cause to civilians. This is especially true at this stage of the war, when the civilian population. It is not especially true at this stage of the war, but like it's always been the case. That was the argument for the Rafah offensive as well, that it would be disproportionate harm. That's what the International Court of Justice said. So why is this genocidal? Why is this illegal but not the rest? Or at the very least, why are you not saying that it was always illegal? Why are you putting a line in the sand and saying from this date onwards it would be illegal? It's a weird thing to say. Honestly, this letter infuriates me. Responsibility. To avoid doubt, we note that if Minister Katz's plan proceeds, Israel will bear responsibility for whatever occurs in the camp, regardless of whether the camp's management is delegated to private entities or otherwise. Blah blah blah. The encouragement of emigration plan is illegal. In principle, every person must be allowed to leave an area in which hostilities are taking place. However, encouraging the immigration of a specific ethnic group is illegal. Moreover, any departures to third states from this proposed camp would be the result of distress caused by the destruction of homes and vital infrastructure. Yeah, this is the lie that this is voluntary immigration. It isn't. If you destroy homes and then tell people, would you like to leave, there is coercion in the fact that you destroyed their home first. So it's not voluntary, right? There's a coercive environment, as the letter says. In light of the above, we believe that if implemented, the plan may constitute a war crime of forcible transfer and deportation. Due to the plan's systematic and widespread nature, the crime against humanity of deportation or forcible transfer, the crime against humanity of severe deprivation of liberty, and the crime against humanity of persecution. In addition, there is a high risk that given the dismal humanitarian conditions in Gaza, and specifically if the population is pushed into a small area, the crime of extermination could materialize due to the likely creation of living conditions leading to the destruction of part of the population. Additionally, the concentration of civilians under extreme density and existing humanitarian conditions may be interpreted as the deliberate infliction on the group of conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, a conduct which falls under the provision of genocide. Several ministers and MKs have made statements that may be interpreted as expressing such intent. The plan also appears to contradict the ICJ's provisional measures. Again, why now? Like, Israel has concentrated people in areas that are unfit for human habitation many times before in this conflict. So why now? Why this? It feels like something like, oh, now we need to say something because this is getting out of hand. Very frustrating letter. So they say it's a manifestly illegal order, and they say, we therefore urgently call on all relevant authorities to publicly renounce this plan, disavow it, and ensure that it is not implemented. Here's the list of signatures. So these are all well-known Israeli scholars. Eyal Ben Benisti, of course, being the more famous of them all, um, but also like Eyal Gross, David Kratzmer, Ilya Lieblich, Dorian Lustig, Tamar Megiddo, Yuval Sheni. They're all like really well-known Israeli scholars. Um, and like of different ideologies. Like I would not say that Yuval Sheni and Ilya Lieblich, for example, think exactly alike on everything. Um, but yeah, so you can see how there's things that are happening, the Omer Bartov article, this letter, right, that are shifting the Overton window, that are giving the idea of Palestinian rights and self-determination power, which is what explains the freakout of sanctioning the ICC, sanctioning Francesco Albanese, threatening the ICC prosecutor, um, arguably threatening the ICC prosecutor, and arguably leading to the resignation of the Commission of Inquiry. It's because ideas are starting to get power. So Erica Aldrich says, what will stop the genocide? It feels like as Israel ramps up its extermination, it becomes more impossible to deny it in the West, and yet our governments seem unmoved. Well, this is what I think is happening now. I think there's a quote in Batman in The Dark Knight that says, "The night is darkest just before dawn." And I think this is what we're seeing. I think we are in the darkest point of the night where people are like entities that deal with accountability are being sanctioned. Like Francesco Albanese cannot have a debit card. Karim Khan cannot have a debit card because of the sanctions. And so the night is very dark right now. Israel is like bombarding every country in the Middle East. The night is very dark, but it is very dark because they're desperate, knowing that um, at least in the minds of public opinion, this is a genocide right now. I think in by the time South Africa, and if you look at my interview with Owen Jones, my first interview with Owen Jones, by the time South Africa presented its application at the ICJ, I feel like the politically costly thing to do was to say this is a genocide. If the court had needed to say at that time, is this a genocide or not, it would have been politically highly costly for the court to say this is a genocide. So most likely the court would have found a way to like, I don't know, soften the blow, sort of like what it did with Serbia, where it said not everything was a genocide. Srebrenica was a genocide, but not everything was a genocide. Um, And it would have needed to find something like that to manage the political blow of saying this is a genocide. I feel like if the court were forced to say it now, or maybe not now, maybe like in a few months, the politically costly thing to do would be to say it is not a genocide. Like there would be protests in The Hague the very next day, the very day that the ICJ says this. So I think it's important to not underestimate the impact that politics plays in the law. So I feel like the law is able to operate with more freedom um, within the context of a specific politics. Like it is more difficult to go against public opinion than to follow public opinion, right? And so I think right now, if the court were to say it's not a genocide, then it would need to do something to mitigate the response that they would get. It's like I feel by now it's pretty obvious that yes, public opinion will expect a genocide, determination. I'm not saying that the law should follow what the people say, but I am saying that judges are political entities as well. And so how they react depends on the environment in which they operate. Um, they would be more cautious in an environment where most people thought this isn't a genocide. Like the way this works is legal problems seem unsolvable until they are. Critical approaches sort of like give legal operators the opportunity to resolve things in different environments. Um, so the typical example is there was a long time when slavery was considered an unsolvable problem. What are you gonna do? You're gonna just take people's quote unquote property away from them? Oh, it's an unsolvable problem. You can never solve this. It's impossible to solve. Um, and then abolitionists came in and slave revolts came in and like people started pressing um, um, towards the abolition of slavery until slavery became politically unpalatable as well. Wars happened over this, right? Um, and so the impossible problem becomes possible to solve because the politics changes. And that's what I'm talking about, right? So I feel like in the minds of public opinion, this is a genocide already. So if the court had to decide now, it would have an easier chance, an easier time justifying, yeah, this is a genocide, than it would have in January 2024, right? Um, so Okay, Odara says, I think perhaps a few of them recognize that what happens after all this might implicate them if they have not spoken out. Yeah, so there is a point here of someone told me this, like it's we've gotten to the point where it's sort of shifted. It used to be, career suicide to say it's genocide. And now it feels like it will be career suicide to not have said it was genocide. I think I agree with that. Uh Rosova says, or perhaps we're beyond the event horizon and only gets darker. I hope not. I really hope not. Tatsikos, it says maybe they thought before they could beat the ICJ case, but this is truly refutable. Can you explain? I'm not following. Econoca says now they're acting out in the open, which made people more aware of the Israeli exception that criminalizes Palestinian solidarity in all its shapes. It's like what you said about what they did in Iran. Yeah, yeah. So things are changing, right? And I feel like to wrap up the argument, I feel like what's happening now is that we've been trying to fight for Palestinian rights and self-determination and accountability for Israel through mechanisms that are probably, like, let's say, non-state, like the ICC, the Special Rapporteur, the Commission of Inquiry, and I feel like given that the ideas are getting power now, and we're seeing this disproportionate response by Israel and the United States and the UK trying to like stifle pro-Palestine arguments and advocacy, um, what happened recently in Bogota with the Hague Group meeting is very important. So I also my final thing that I want to read for you guys is um, the joint statement of on the conclusion of the Emergency Conference on Palestine by the Hague Group. This group of states that want to find diplomatic and legal solutions to the crisis, to the Palestine issue. Satsika says, also them ruling no genocide would have horrible consequences for all oppressed people. There would be genocide contests all around the world. Yeah, I agree with that. So I think it's important to take a look at like this document because it is um, sort of like the idea of like, okay, you want to use your sovereignty, your political hegemony to fight me on this. Fine, we'll fight sovereignty with sovereignty, and we'll see who wins. Right. So basically, what the Hague Group is saying is we're going to have the fight of our lives for the heart and soul of international law. That's what we're going to do. We're going to fight you as sovereign states. So it is a very interesting battle. There's battle lines being shaped up here, um, in a way that I don't think we've seen in a very long time. Like the global South united like this against um, colonialist forces. We haven't seen this since the decolonization years in the 1960s. And before that, I would say maybe Latin America going against the Pan-Americanism in the 1920s. It's very encouraging. Oh, Bandung, of course, Bandung, of course, as well. But it's very encouraging to see this happening. Like we should be aware of the momentous nature of what is going on in the world right now. Global South states and some global North states are getting together to make sure that they fight for the right of the global South to disagree with the global North. It's quite fascinating. So the Hague Group says, well, I'm not going to read the preambulatory clauses, other than a couple. It says, lamenting the repeated mass forced displacement of Palestinian civilian population and the obstruction of their return. Um, Grieving each life taken in the course of Israel's genocidal actions in the occupied Palestinian territory. Um, Recognizing the risk that Israel's actions pose to the prospects for regional peace and security, as well as the integrity of international law at large, refusing to remain passive observers to the devastation in the occupied Palestinian territory and the denial of the Palestinian people's inalienable right to self-determination, reaffirming the ICJ and the resolutions. Um, mm, Welcoming the high-level international conference on the peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine. This is the France-Saudi Arabia conference that is happening later this month. Um, stressing the urgency of all member states to fulfill in good faith the obligations assumed in accordance with the UN Charter and international law. We hereby announce the following measures to be adopted based on states' domestic legal and legislative frameworks. 1. Prevent the provision or transfer of arms, munitions, military fuel, related military equipment, and dual-use items to Israel as appropriate to ensure that our industry does not contribute the tools to enable or facilitate genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, and other violations of international law. 2. Prevent the transit, docking, and servicing of vessels at any port, if applicable, within our territorial jurisdiction, while being fully compliant with applicable international law, including UNCLOS, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. In all cases where there is a clear risk of the vessel being used to carry arms, munitions, military fuel, related military equipment, and dual-use items to Israel, to ensure that our territorial waters and ports do not serve as conducts for activities that enable or facilitate genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and other violations of international law. 3. Prevent the carriage of arms, munitions, military fuel, related military equipment, and dual-use items to Israel on vessels bearing our flag, while being fully compliant with applicable international law, including UNCLOS. Ensuring full accountability, including deflagging for non-compliance with this prohibition, not to render aid or assistance in maintaining the situation created by Israel's illegal presence in the OPT. 4. Commence an urgent review of all public contracts in order to prevent public institutions and public funds, where applicable, from supporting Israel's illegal occupation on the Palestinian territory, which may entrench its unlawful presence in the territory, to ensure that our nationals and companies and entities under our jurisdiction, as well as our authorities, do not act in any way that would entail recognition or provide aid or assistance in maintaining the situation created by Israel's illegal presence in the occupied Palestinian territory. 5. Comply with our obligation to ensure accountability for the most serious crimes under international law through robust, impartial, and independent investigations and prosecutions at national or international levels, in compliance with our obligation to ensure justice for all victims and the prevention of future crimes. 6. Support universal jurisdiction mandates as and where applicable in our legal constitutional frameworks and judiciaries to ensure justice for all victims and the prevention of future crimes in the occupied Palestinian territory. We emphasize that these measures constitute a collective commitment to defend the foundational principles of international law. We all appeal to the United Nations member states to enforce our obligations for promoting mechanisms for cooperation between all parties in 16 July 2025. So, the Republic of Iraq and the State of Libya do not formally recognize the State of Israel. That's funny. So just to make sure that I tell you which states these are, this is Bolivia, Cuba, Colombia, Indonesia, Iraq, Malaysia, Libya, Namibia, Nicaragua, Oman, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, South Africa, and all other states that endorse the following before the 20th of September. So this is a very important thing that's happening. It's the use of sovereignty against sovereignty. So I guess my overall conclusion with this is what we're seeing right now is the night being darkest right before dawn. I think I am very encouraged by the Hague Group. I do think that the Hague Group should have been a little bit more broad in its approach. Like, this feels a little bit too focused on the specifics right now and not focused enough on the broader circumstances of Palestinian oppression. So it has no anti-colonial component, I think. Like, it doesn't have a plan for the future. It just wants to stop the genocide, right? Yeah. So, but I guess my point is the fact that this happened is already momentous, because it is fighting sovereignty with sovereignty. So far, we have fought sovereignty with non-sovereignty, and that's why the U.S. is being so, you know, forceful, I guess, radical. So I find it very encouraging that it's now sovereignty against sovereignty. So I guess in sum, what I'm saying is, the reason why we're seeing this very unhinged reaction to the pro-Palestine cause through sanctions and covert action is that the Overton window for the discussion of this as genocide is changing. It is changing because Omer Bartov can write an article and all of a sudden everyone talks about it. It becomes like the last time something like this something like this happened was the what do you call it, the Ta-Nehisi Coates' book that came out, The Message. That was another key moment in the Overton window expanding. Everyone was talking about it. And I feel it's the same now. Everyone is talking about this Omer Bartov article, and it's changing how we talk about genocide. And this would not have been possible before. It is only now possible because the Overton window is opening. Because like Joe Rogan and Piers Morgan are all talking about this, and they're opening the door for um, these kinds of analysis to become widely read. Um, and so that's happening. And also, you can see, so people aren't talking about this as much, but you can see people that, I don't know, a year ago were openly saying this isn't genocide, or even worse, they were, assisting Israel at the Hague, or were very quiet, um, coming out and saying, "Oh, I need to take a stand." Why now? It feels like it's because it's undeniable now that you need to say something, right? So it's again, it's an interesting symptom. You have the Overton window expanding. You have people that defended this no longer defending it. Things are changing. You have states um, getting together to fight the overreaction by the United States through sovereign mechanisms. Um, these are things that have not usually happened when it comes to Palestine. Palestine usually was a lot more alone in these discussions. And it is encouraging, even though we are living in very dark times, it is encouraging to see um, these kinds of reactions happening. Both these conversations around the Omer Bartov article, these letters being signed by Israeli scholars, and these that are sort of like changing tune or speaking out for, like, I don't know if the first time, but speaking out, um, and the Hague Group. I want you to contextualize this in this way, in that it is a situation where the Overton window is opening up, and we can see it opening up, and so there's a reaction to that opening of the Overton window. So maybe I'm too optimistic. I hope that I'm not idealistic or naive. But I feel that what's going on is this: it's the idea of Palestinian rights and self-determination is garnering power, and when ideas get power, they become scary to those in power, and they overreact. That overreaction is what we're seeing with the U.S. sanctions, with the Israeli pressures on the ICC, um, and or the alleged, I guess I need to say alleged pressures on the ICC, um, and um, and that is encouraging. Like, if you've been following Israel Palestine for a long time, this is not something, this is not normal, I guess. Yeah, so I guess this is my optimistic. I've become an optimist. I used to be a cynic. Now apparently I'm an optimist. So yeah, that's it. Erica Audrey says, "What do you mean sovereignty against sovereignty?" Well, states against states. Is Francesca Albanese cannot take on the United States, but I mean Indonesia, South Africa, um, eventually other states like Brazil is going to join South Africa at the ICJ now. They can take the United States in ways that non-state actors cannot. So deploying sovereignty is always more powerful than deploying mandates by international organizations. Oh, hey, Shinibolo, you arrived just in time for me to say it's 7:02 p.m. It's time for me to go to make my dinner.